Hello, friends. Today we're going to talk about a book I've been reading and where anxiety lives. Let's talk. Hi, friends. This is Bethany Jennings, and you're listening to We Should Talk. It's a podcast where we talk about anything and everything to encourage, equip, and empower you to be a decent human. Let's talk. Hello and welcome back. Let me explain the setting for you. I am in Little Rock currently. David's doing some studio stuff with Kurt and DJ and Brandon maybe, and just a lot of things are going on. So I am in a guest house here, and it is so nice. The people of North Little Rock are the absolute sweetest. They're so precious, and they've always been so kind to us. And so this is where I'm at. I've just made breakfast for Onyx and myself because he doesn't sleep as late when we are not home. So here we are. He's on the other side of the room in a very squishy chair, doing like a calm down app thing. And I am on a couch looking out a window into a backyard, drinking coffee with a candle lit. So anyways, if that's not what you're doing, I'm sorry, but you're welcome to if you're not driving or something. So let's talk about today's podcast. So I've been reading a book. It's by Susan Sander and Albert Stark, right? So they are scientists, I guess, and they wrote this book together, and it's called Anxiety in Relationships. Now, I know in the past we've talked about anxiety and sources, symptoms, and solutions kind of approach. I like to do that approach. I really do like to do that approach to a lot of mental health podcasts. Those three, source, symptom, and solution. But today I was reading this book, and it really brought to light the fact that a lot of people don't fully understand what's actually happening in their brain when they feel anxiety. Now, I will say that anxiety is like a very specific name for fear. Fear is one of our core emotions, right? It shows up before all of the rest of the very intricate and detailed and specifically named emotions show up. It is one of our core emotions. Anxiety is a form of fear. Now, we need to understand that not just from a psychological perspective, but from a spiritual perspective. We have a tendency to say, well, that's a spiritual matter, and so we don't approach it in any other way but spiritual. Here's the thing. It can be both spiritual and psychological because we are both of those in our existence. So it can be multifaceted, and we need to approach it with a multifaceted approach. I think that is very important to understand. We're going to do a little bit deeper dive into anxiety, and not just how it feels or the symptoms, not just that stuff, but where it actually lives in your brain, the science of it, how it develops, and we'll talk about some options of what you can do about it. But let's talk about where it lives. So in this book, Anxiety in Relationships, this is one of the things I'll be sourcing in this episode, but there's also different peer-reviewed journals and stuff like that support this book. They're not just pulling it out their ear, They really these authors really start describing like the source of anxiety in our personal lives, and it can feel kind of mysterious. I don't know why I feel this way. It can feel mysterious until you sit down and actually think about it, but it's tough to think about because it's a heavy topic. So science has uncovered that anxious thoughts and behaviors are really brain neurons and hormones being triggered and processed. That's all that is. When that firing of the neurons and the emission of the hormones and all that stuff, when that's interrupted or when it happens at an unnatural speed, that's when anxiety shows up. So you should have neurons firing and you should have hormones doing their job, but when that process is interrupted or sped up, then you have a problem. When anxiety strikes in relationships, it's often tied to an underlying emotional memory and attachment pattern And that starts in the brain. Here's the thing. Everyone has a genetic code. We are all fearfully and wonderfully made. We have a genetic code that helps determine our reactions. Even from birth, we have that. When we feel hungry, we know what we're supposed to do. When we feel scared or cold, we know what we're supposed to do. That's a genetic code. We're born with that. But then life and circumstances, environment, not nature, but nurture, starts putting further programming, quote unquote, on our behaviors. The program informs us how we're supposed to relate or react, and even how we love. That's what's happening there. Oh, this bird just flew by. So that's what's happening there. So the neurochemicals behind anxiety, there's neurotransmitters, right? And they play a pivotal role in this. It modulates anxiety. Serotonin is one of them. It's, we've talked about this in the dose episode, the dopamine, oxytocin, serotonin, epinephrine. So serotonin is dubbed the feel-good neurotransmitter. Low levels of serotonin are associated with mood disorders and anxiety. Here, let mommy help you. Okay, sorry, Onyx needed help. Neurochemicals, neurotransmitters, they play a very pivotal role, is what I was saying, I believe. And one of those is serotonin, and that's your feel-good neurotransmitter. So if you have low levels of serotonin, that's going to be associated with like mood disorders and anxiety. Another one is GABA, is what they call it. GABA, and it stands for this big long name, gamma, whatever acid. So this is an inhibitory neurotransmitter, right? So this calms neural activity. So when these levels are reduced, it leads to heightened anxiety. So low serotonin, low GABA, and then the norepinephrine. This is involved in the body's stress response. When you have elevated levels of norepinephrine, then that results in increased vigilance, increased arousal, alertness. This is very common with anxiety disorders. So those are like the three main ones. So those are the chemicals or the neurotransmitters. But now we need to talk about where in the brain anxiety lives. So, sorry, I'm like processing exactly how I should say this as I go. So there's certain regions in the brain. One we need to talk about, these are the two main ones. The amygdala and prefrontal cortex. Those are the main ones. So the amygdala, this is what a lot of people call the fear center. And that's because it processes threats and triggers the fight or flight response. But the issue is hyperactivity in the amygdala is linked to really high levels of anxiety. But then there's the prefrontal cortex. This is responsible for decision making, and it regulates emotional responses. In anxiety disorders, the prefrontal cortex, that may be struggling to modulate the amygdala's reactions effectively because they're supposed to be working in tandem, right? But when there's an issue, that's when anxiety shows up. The other two areas for consideration in anxiety is the hippocampus and the insula. So the hippocampus, this region, this helps contextualize events and memories. But in anxiety, it can misinterpret a safe situation as threatening, but not because of the current circumstance. It's actually because of a past memory or a past experience that's making a normal situation feel very dangerous, right? The hippocampus is for contextualization. In the context where someone jumped out of the bushes and robbed me, yes, I should feel very much in danger, right? But in the context where I'm just washing dishes and someone interrupts my thoughts and I freak out and I'm so shocked and scared, and in that context, I should not have been scared. But because I was surprised, it takes me back to a past experience, right? It's hippocampus is for contextualization. The insula, this is involved in interoceptive awareness. So this helps us perceive our internal bodily state. And heightened activity of the insula can make us more sensitive to anxiety-related physical sensations. And we're going to talk about those physical sensations here in a little bit. But the main parts of the brain we're going to talk about are the amygdala and the prefrontal cortex. So I know this is a lot of science. You know I can go full nerd real quick, but we're going to talk about it. So all of these play a role in anxiety. Amygdala, prefrontal cortex, hippocampus, insula, all of those play a role in it. But the main ones we're going to talk about are the amygdala and the prefrontal cortex. So, and we'll talk about the insula as far as like understanding like what your body feels in the internal state, like the internal bodily reactions to anxiety. We're going to talk about that as well. Hold on, I need a drink of coffee. Let's talk about the amygdala. The amygdala is your emotional protector, so to speak. The emotional cycle actually starts in the amygdala, and this is the center for processing emotional stimuli. Its job is to regulate emotions. You see it, you see this in our behavior and our motivation when it's not doing its job. It controls your memory as well, because memories are emotional to some extent. Some memories are very emotional. Like, we're talking about the memories that don't sit in the forefront, right? So one time I was walking through a nursing home after playing the piano at like a nursing home visit, and I smelled aftershave and coffee, and I was in tears. And it was because that's exactly what my papa smelled like every morning, was aftershave and coffee. And that memory that was, stored in the amygdala, that brought back a very emotional response for me. The smell of my granny's house, very emotional response for me. I wish there was a way that you could bottle smells, because I don't know if I'll ever get that smell back. The smell of granny, it doesn't matter where she lived. In my lifetime, she lived in 3 different houses, 3 different states almost. Well, 2 different states, but 3 different houses, all different cities, all different whatever. And her house always smelled the same. And I wish I could capture that smell. If anyone knows how, please let me know. Anyways, but it's a very emotional thing. Those memories are there. And your amygdala helps with that. But when the amygdala is working right, it sends signals to the brain to react to stimuli, to the rest of the brain. But when danger is perceived, like it doesn't have to be present. Danger does not actually have to be present. When danger is perceived, then that gate is shut to the brain. You start acting without thinking because you perceive danger. And when a memory is stored in the amygdala and it's unpleasant and it surfaces, then you feel anxiety. And the amygdala is trying to protect you. Fear, anger, aggression, and even anxiety are trying to protect you. Because the brain doesn't care. The brain doesn't care how you feel. The brain only cares about keeping you alive. The brain's job is to keep this body alive. It doesn't care how you feel. It's going to do whatever it has to do to keep you safe. And if that means making you angry, if that means making you feel anxiety, if that means making you feel aggressive, that it doesn't matter. The brain's job is to keep you alive. Your brain does not care how you feel. It only wants to keep you alive. When we have an unpleasant memory that surfaces from the amygdala, the gate to the rest of the brain is going to shut. The amygdala is in charge. But we got to figure out how to undo that, right? But when people experience relationship anxiety, the amygdala often takes the lead because it's very emotional, right? And the amygdala will override the more rational parts of the brain. And that's because it's trying to do its job. But sometimes it sees danger where no danger exists. It perceives danger without the presence of danger. And the amygdala, in an effort to do its job, makes you feel very negative emotions or act in very inappropriate ways because the reasoning portion of your brain is off limits during that time. This is shown actually in multiple journals, but specifically studies that show individuals with anxiety disorders have often display heightened amygdala activity. This is Etkin and Wager showed that in 2007 in theirs. What was that one called? The biological psychiatry is what that one was called. But it's just, especially when processing emotionally charged stimuli, there's very, very heightened amygdala activity. So that's the amygdala. The amygdala is the protector. The prefrontal cortex is your counselor. The prefrontal cortex is exactly where you'd think it would be. It's in the front. It's right behind your forehead, right? It's your counselor, not your protector. It's your rational thinker, not your just reactor. It controls cognitive function. That's the official name for it, right? So it controls your cognitive functions like learning, reasoning, decision making. This is your ability to think and then act. The prefrontal cortex and the amygdala are supposed to act together as a team. But when anxiety shows up in the brain, it makes it much more difficult to communicate and use the prefrontal cortex. Impulse control doesn't exist when the amygdala is flooding the brain with anxiety because it perceives danger and it does not process properly. So when this happens, the amygdala is trying to flood the brain with anxiety. When this happens, one of two things is going to happen. Depending on how anxiety affects you, one of two things happens. Either it muzzles or it megaphones. And by this, I mean, these are terms that the book uses specifically, is muzzle and megaphone. Stress puts a muzzle on the amygdala, and it silences stress signals to the prefrontal cortex. So it doesn't allow the amygdala to get the information out, right? It doesn't allow it to communicate at all. So it muzzles the communication between the amygdala and prefrontal cortex. Or stress puts a megaphone on the amygdala and overloads the prefrontal cortex, so it doesn't have the ability to process properly. Not being able to react or having all reaction, either one is not a healthy response. Neuroimaging actually supports this dynamic. When the amygdala is overactive, the prefrontal cortex struggles to engage. And we see that there was an article in the Journal of Neuroscience showing that it does, in fact, impair decision-making and emotional regulation. So muzzle or megaphone, I don't know. Like, it depends on what's happening. First of all, it depends on what anxious trigger is happening for people. Sometimes people experience both of these just at different times. So the amygdala, the prefrontal cortex, the communication's messed up. But now we have to see what is the source of the anxiety. Understanding the basis of your anxiety is essential in addressing it the correct way. If it's amygdala-based, it looks like really intense fear or panic after experiencing the stimulus. Then your body starts to respond. This is where the that other part of your brain I was talking about, remember, it's like helps you get in touch with your internal body changes during anxiety. This is where this kicks in. Your body starts to respond. What does the body feel like, or what's actually happening during an anxiety response? Adrenaline rush. Your blood flow increases. Your airways expand. Your blood sugar rises so you can access fast energy. Your pupils dilate so that you can see what's going on and see any dangers coming at you. These reactions are designed to help, but it doesn't actually always feel helpful. Because if you think about it, early humanity, when we felt danger, we could have died. It could have been a saber-toothed tiger. It could have been a T-Rex. It could have been... I know that doesn't exactly line up. But the point is, it was an actual, factual, life-threatening danger. And that's why all these things happen. Blood flow increases, airways increase, expand. Your heart beats faster to process all of the blood rushing and the oxygen expansion. And you can run faster because your blood sugar spikes. You have more energy and your extremities are better circulated. Your eyes are more alert and aware, and they take in more light to see dangers. That was supposed to keep us alive. That's what that was trying to do. They're supposed to be helpful, but it doesn't always feel helpful. If it's prefrontal cortex based, the amygdala may be sending too many signals on weak pathways. So if it's amygdala based, that means your body is just reacting to keep you safe. If it's prefrontal cortex based, the amygdala is sending signals, but the signals it's sending out are traveling on weak pathways. And these pathways are worn down over time because it's just had too much going on. And it creates overactivity which leads to high distractibility. It leads to lack of behavioral flexibility. It leads to increased impulsivity. There's just too much happening. When anxiety takes over your nervous system, it overloads and weakens and even damages the pathways in your brain. That's why, like, your threshold before you start feeling anxious is getting lower and lower and lower and lower because those pathways in your brain are getting worn out. Overworking the prefrontal cortex, though it needs to be working, overworking it leads to irrational and sporadic decisions. It leads to impulsivity. Your cognitive function is not going to work properly. And if the prefrontal cortex is underworked, then it creates that heavy, sluggish, stuck feeling. One thing to consider, by the way, females are still developing their prefrontal cortex at around age 23. And males are still developing a prefrontal cortex until 25 years. This is why a lot of young people really struggle with impulse control and decision making when they're under stress. I do not suggest making any lifelong permanent decisions, if you know what I mean, without a lot of thought and counsel at any age, but especially before your 20s. Okay, so let's just briefly talk about things that can help. I wanted to talk about really the science behind it and where anxiety lives, but we can talk about some things that can help. Understanding the dynamic between this team of the amygdala and the prefrontal cortex is important. And so now we've talked about it. Now let's talk about how to restore some balance here. Mindfulness and meditation is what the non-religious are going to call it. We call that prayer. It helps to slow down the amygdala reactivity. It strengthens the prefrontal cortex because you're focusing your attention, right? And when doing that, you need to do calm breathing. Calm yourself down. There are all kinds of breathing exercises you can look up. CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, we talked about that. It helps reframe distorted thoughts that arise when your amygdala is in like overdrive. It allows the prefrontal cortex to take control again. And so you make reasonable, rational decisions. But I have said it 1,000 times and I will say it again. The best therapy is prayer. It's going to help the right things be in control again. Exercise actually is very helpful. It helps regulate your neurotransmitters, like your serotonin, your norepinephrine. It reduces your amygdala's overactivity. Again, if you want to, it's way back early. It's an early episode, but it's called Dose, and it talks about all of these neurotransmitters that make you feel good. Proper sleep and nutrition. We really like to skip over this one, but it's so important. Poor sleep, high sugar diet, it all makes anxiety worse. Your brain needs rest and it needs balance if it's going to function. Now that you know your anxiety comes from emotional memories, brain structure, life experiences. You know all this, but there is a path. You're not just going to be stuck here your whole life. There are options. There is a path forward, but understanding the origin should give you the power to take those next steps. Anxious thoughts, behaviors they're not just a moral failure or a weakness. They're your brain's response to stimuli. That's what anxious thoughts are. Anxious thoughts are your brain's response to stimuli. And when the processes are disrupted, when they happen too fast, that's when anxiety emerges. And understanding that your amygdala is just trying to protect you, even if it makes you uncomfortable. Understanding that your prefrontal cortex guides you and offers a more reasonable way to manage your emotions and responses, that is the key to moving forward. So anyways, thank you for talking to me today. It's a little bit of a longer episode, but that's all right. I hope it helps you, either with yourself or with someone in your life. Share it with them. Feel free to share this episode. They don't have to listen to every episode I've ever made, but if you think this episode's going to help them understand their body or understand someone in their family, please send it to them. And let's just keep learning and growing together. And I hope this helps you become a better human. I know it got real sciencey today, but I had fun. Okay. Love y'all. Bye. Well, that was fun. I'm glad you stuck around for the whole thing. And thank you for talking to me today. Y'all go like and follow and review and do all the podcast things that people do. And don't forget to be a good human.